fits into the landscape of documentary or films about films, which are kind of now gone. Now that now that everything's VOD, it's like the concept of special features or something that's about a film is kind of receding into the landscape.
Which is a drag for, I have at least one friend who's, most of his work is making DVD extras. So that's maybe not the most secure place to be right now.
That's very true. I haven't thought of it as putting it in a bigger sense like you did there. That's cool.
Would you call it, I don't know, we have something in our video magazine that we call video essays, which are basically an essay you would have about a film, like if you were an academic, but instead of writing about a scene, you're able to show that scene.
Sure.
Is that what you would describe it as?
Certainly there's a big video essay influence, and in the making of it, I had seen and considered things like the 90-minute Star Wars reviews, or that deconstruction of the that car chase scene in The Dark Knight, or those amazing ones that Kirby Ferguson does. Everything's a remix.
Yeah.
Probably what makes 237 different from a lot of those is it's not my voiceover driving it. It's a roundup of 5 other experts' points of view that we're struggling to sort of illuminate.
And you're using the voiceover, and I can understand that you don't want to have to create a bias by showing maybe the person that's delivering it. You want to kind of purely represent what they think about the film, but the voiceover is still also kind of a loaded technique in documentary. Otherwise, it's almost has that aura of being a Richard Attenborough kind of factual.
That voiceover brings a certain credence and authority. That's true.
Yeah, well, and I'm always interested in the way that, in documentaries, sometimes a person is brought forth as the expert, and there's never a contrary opinion. And depending on how much time they spend, building up this person's credentials, the audience is more or less inclined to take what he says as gospel. So I think going into it, we weren't exactly sure, what the ramifications were going to be of using these competing voices, but presenting alternate points of view in that format seemed like an interesting experiment to go through and to find out for ourselves as it played whether different voices would reinforce each other or all be mutually exclusive.
One thing we talked about early on was nature documentaries, where you see the poor hungry gazelle the poor hungry lion, and needs to feed its cubs, and it tracks down the gazelle. And then you see the other version, which is about the lovely gazelle that's trying to survive, and this horrible lion is haunting it. And you could use the same footage, it would just be a different voiceover or a different point of view. That was one of the things we talked about.
I teach a film editing class, and one of the first exercises we run through is a bunch of nature footage. And having previously spent a fair amount of time discussing screen direction, I would have the students make these little dramas where like a mouse comes out of a hole and he looks screen right, and we have a shot of a hawk looking screen left, and then the mouse continues, turns around and goes back into the hole. Or actually that mouse shot is one continuous shot. It comes out of the hole, looks screen right, runs back into the hole. But if you intercut it with the shot of the hawk, clearly it seems like the hawk is looking at the mouse and the mouse is reacting to the hawk. And it's always kind of mind-blowing because people assume that you're watching a documentary and everything you see is exactly the way it happened, and very clearly these are two very real things. The mouse did come out of the hole and go back in, and the hawk did turn this way, but the only reason that we're making this relationship is based on screen direction and these opposing looks, which is something that most people don't even question. But I think that was an exercise among many that we did in the class that made me kind of question some of the conventions of the documentary form, and made me think it would be fun to kind of manipulate some of those. Also there's that long section in the film where John Fell Ryan is talking about his experiences working in a film archive and how he started to doubt the relationship between what he was seeing and what he was saying, and what he was seeing in the footage and what he was hearing in the voiceover. He suggested that Kubrick, having seen those sorts of newsreels growing up, might have been doing something very similar in The Shining. And of course, that gave me permission in the edit to stretch the relationship between what we're seeing and what we're hearing, in kind of interesting ways.
Well, I find it interesting that you use repetitive shots, especially of the theater, some people watching the beginning, because it cues the spectator to be aware that you are imposing these images over these voiceovers, like you're selecting it. And because even if you were taking freely from different sources, and that may make someone think of a kind of curator of images, the fact that when you repeat an image, it seems like you shouldn't do that, like that it doesn't work.
But when you repeat an image, now you're seeing it in a new context, but you can still keep the old context in mind. Like we always get an interesting reaction. There's that time where Jay Widener is talking about some of the images that he sees when he moves through the film very slowly. In particular, that little hidden image when Jack and Ullman shake hands, and 10 minutes or so later, we see that shot again when Julie is talking about the window. And people remember that first thing, but now they're seeing this shot in a different way. And of course, the other exercise that I got especially engaged in was using the same characters as surrogates for different people. So Jack Nicholson can sometimes be Jack Nicholson, but he can also be Jack Torrance, or he can also be Stanley Kubrick, or he can also be Bill Blakemore, or he can also be how many other people, and kind of testing that, I think was one of the fun games, in the process.
What about the process of altering the images, kind of intervening and adding like video where there isn't any, or changing the Shining poster, inserting?
Yeah, well, I tried to. It was great fun to do that. Especially at that beginning when we see the Shining posters. Although there's a part of me that was kind of reluctant to do it, because I was getting more as the process continued. I was getting more and more interested in how different can the image be, and can we expect the audience to project something different on it? Like, could he be really looking at just a poster for a jazz musician, and can the audience see that as a poster for The Shining? Though we started a little easier, and also in a way that trying to make it seamless enough that a lot of people have said, was he really looking at a poster for The Shining? I don't remember that. I don't remember that scene. I don't know if I answered that question, but
well, there's an implication as well, because it's a film about looking closely at like the text, and the text as being the sacred object, and you are clearly taking away that pristine wrapping. And
well, I mean, that goes into John Phil Ryan's thing of what you're hearing and what you're seeing is sometimes the same thing, but other times you need to pay attention and challenge it and consider it. I don't know that Room 237 has an obligation to be more rigorous in that relationship than the film that we're talking about.
I mean, the film starts with kind of an interesting joke like that, which is we see Tom Cruise walking down the street in Eyes Wide Shut, and the village in New York is standing in for Europe, and he's standing in for Bill Blakemore, who's going to tell us a story about seeing the film for the first time. And we have a burn that says Europe. Well, in fact, it is Europe, because Stanley Kubrick shot that, as we know, near his home in England. So I think that kind of, on a repeat viewing, or at least for me, I always kind of feel like we're pretty straightforward and lay our cards on the table right off the bat about what we're going to do with repurposing footage and so forth, assigning meaning or allowing meaning to be assigned to different shots.
And the use of different films that are outside of the Shining clips, even outside of Kubrick, they kind of make the viewer aware that the entire thing is about media consumption to a certain extent, because the associations that the experts are making are the associations that they've come to through their own life and what they've read or been interested in outside of the film. And that brings us to your interests in what are the clips that you have chosen.
Well, sure, and a lot of those clips are things that have been personally very important to me, and are sort of images that come to my mind when I'm hearing these folks talk, but also imagining, the kind of landscape of film that they're moving through, and the ones that have made big influences on them, or characters from these movies that they might see themselves in.
Yeah, I think there's a moment that really resonates for me in that where Bill Blakemore is talking about discovering that the film is really about the Native American Indians, and there's this shot of very emblematic shot from a Western of a scout looking down and seeing this Indian tribe coming and so forth, and I feel like that's the image that would have been going through both the narrator and the viewer automatically anyway, if we hadn't put it there. At least the one that pops into mind.